So, welcome to our second class of Developing Wisdom and Compassion. And we're focusing on intention this week. So, the intention that the Buddha showed through his birth coming into the world. And we're going to explore a little bit the background of what brought that intention to the fore, which was his previous lives. He had many previous lives where he did um, wonderful compassionate actions, even as an animal in many of the lives. So those are kind of fun to explore. But first, we're going to just do a little review of what we went over last week. So we'll start with the first, which is wisdom. So would anyone like to kind of go through this with us? Tell us what wisdom means in the Buddhist tradition? Okay, well, I'll go ahead and go through it. So wisdom is kind of the our innate inner knowledge, what we touch when we are doing meditation. And it also can come through hearing the teachings and reflecting on them and then meditating on them. So through this practical experience of meditation and touching our deepest inner self, we kind of see the emptiness of all forms, especially ourself. We see that the ego is just um, a fiction, really, and that it really has no substantiality to it. So that's kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about wisdom.
And then compassion, we said, was caring deeply enough about others to relieve that suffering as much as possible, as though they were our own loving parents. And I think that one of these points, and we'll see in the stories that we look at tonight, that it has to do with, caring about enemies as well as those we love. But that maybe what happens is those enemies don't really seem so much like enemies anymore. So it's a development of wisdom and compassion that bring us to that point. We'll see this in, like I said, a couple of the stories we're looking at tonight.
So we're going to just quickly go through the acts of the Buddha. I think we'll just skip this slide and just go through them one by one as we look at the slides. So the first group of actions was the Buddha's resolve to be born into the human realm, and we see that the elephant that's over on the right side. He was descending from heaven realms in the form of an elephant, and Queen Maya dreamt about him entering her right side, and then that was after that was his descent, and then he entered her womb, and then he gave his mother gave birth to him by emerging from her right side painlessly, which is lovely way to give birth.
My kids didn't do that.
Right, those of you who are mothers who can appreciate how special that is, and then. Excuse me.
Gosh.
He took 7 steps, which we see on the right side.
Left.
I'm sorry, on the left side of the screen.
As we face it, yeah. Okay. So then, gosh. We said last week that he was born into the son of a king in a clan in northern India called the Shakya clan. And we saw before this place Lumbini where he was born, and last week we saw a couple of pictures of temples there. Well, at that time, it was very important to have a king of the clan and a strong leader of the clan. And so his father, seeing that he was very special, wanted to make sure that he stayed as the king and didn't go wandering off as a person. So this picture just shows that he really mastered everything. He mastered everything that he needed to in his station in life, they call mastering the worldly arts. But in addition to that, his father made everything beautiful and perfect for him so that he never saw anything bad, so that he would stay in the family. But he saw anyway, no matter how hard his father tried to protect him, he ended up seeing somebody sick, somebody old, and somebody dead, and realized that, in fact, people do suffer. Everything isn't beautiful and wonderful. So he decided to leave home and wander, become a wandering mendicant in northern India.
So that was fairly kind of popular way to follow a spiritual path at that time is a life of renunciation. So he found 5 monks who were practicing these ascetic rituals, and you can see them on the left side. And he joined them. First, he cut his hair, which we see in the center.
Which was a big deal.
Yeah, and then he joined them, and for several years he practiced these ascetic practices. At some point, he was just eating like 1 grain of rice per day, so he was very emaciated, very thin. And then he realized that he really wasn't achieving what he had set out to achieve through these practices. So, he had had this worldly life with all the pleasures, he had had all this ascetic practices, and he realized that neither of these extremes were going to get him to the point of really transcending the suffering in the world. So he decided to take some nourishment and then sit down below a tree, a Bodhi tree, and not get up until he became enlightened. And that took several weeks, but anyway, it did happen. So we'll see that in the next slide.
So this is the image that shows the enlightenment, and what we see that sort of always catches my eye is all of this kind of weapons and bad things that Mara, whose delusion, is throwing at him to get him to get up, because he knows that Mara knows that his gig is up if this guy becomes enlightened. And so he's throwing all of this, whatever negativity, demons come, weapons of destruction come. And because of his accomplishment, and we'll see in these stories how he got there, he was able to maintain his peace during that time, and then become enlightened. And but we kind of Roz and I were talking about how the other thing that this shows, all of this kind of a destruction and fearsome things around him, also kind of shows the struggles that he had to go through as well. The aesthetic practices went on a long time, and deprivation, and and then just sitting and with intention and letting all of his own demons come before him. And he sat through it and struggled, and then overcame he transcended the misunderstanding that we have, transcended the suffering, and found an answer for beings, which was his intention, was not just to overcome it himself, but to find an end to suffering for everybody. And that was really, I think, a lot of his determination came from that intention.
So then once he became enlightened, which it took several weeks of sitting there, that he did, then he wasn't sure he'd be able to express, what he'd experienced to others. But the 5 ascetic practitioners who he had been studying with and practicing with saw him and noticed his radiance, and just realized that he had really achieved something. And so they begged him, please tell us, about the insights you had, and how we can follow in your footsteps on this path. So he did, excuse me, and they became his first disciples. And when he saw how they could relate to his teachings, he felt heartened that he could teach others as well. So one of the things he did after he had been teaching for a while is he went, excuse me, up to the heaven realms where his mother was residing. She had passed away like 7 days after he was born. Excuse me. So he went up to it's called the Tushita heaven where she resided, and taught her and the other residents of that realm. And then he came back down to earth to do some more teaching. And this is a picture of that happening, having him come back to earth to do some further teaching.
So then, after he's 80 or 81 years old, he taught for almost 50 years. And then when he was in his early 80s, it was time for him to, we would say, pass away or die. His followers were very, please don't go. We need you to be here. We need your teachings. But he said, I'm demonstrating impermanence. Everything passes away. You can't hold on to anything. One of the kind of basic teachings of Buddhism. And can't hold on. And so he passed away, and then they carried his teaching forward till we have it today.
Right, and that's sometimes called the parinirvana. So it's when he entered kind of the final stage of enlightenment.
Yeah. So we're going to cover tonight 4 of the stories. There's many of the stories where he developed or showed or practiced wisdom and compassion. And these stories are kind of teaching stories. In these cases, he's an animal, and we just see the wisdom and the compassion that he shows as an animal in the face of threats and danger and like. So this first story is called A Precious Life. And the story is that he was a beautiful, beautiful golden deer in a very rich forest in northern India. And the deer lived in this very lush forest. The grasses in this forest were very long, so the visitors hardly ever came. And so the wildlife and animal life was very rich. And one day the ruler in the area was out on his horse, but with his charioteers, and saw this beautiful forest and said, there must be animals in there that I could take as my trophies. So he went into the forest, and soon the chariots all got tangled up in the grass, and he went on his own deeper into the forest until he saw this beautiful deer. And he thought, what a prize that would be. So he pursued the deer. I can't remember when the next page is. He pursued the deer. He urged his horse forward, and the deer ran and jumped over a ravine. And the king was so transfixed by the sight of this deer that when the deer jumped over the ravine, the king wasn't paying attention, and his horse stopped suddenly, and he tumbled straight into the ravine, and he couldn't get out. He was scratched and harmed. And the deer, having gone a little further, noticed that there was no more sound of horses' feet. And he went back, and he saw that this king was in this ravine. And he thought, oh my God, this poor king is so used to a good life and an easy life. There's no way he's going to be able to get out of here. So he went up to the king and he said, I can help you get out. And the king said, why would you help me? And anyway, how could you help me? And so the deer went around and found a rock that was about the weight of a man and ran around the hills practicing carrying this weight, took the rock off his back and went down to the king and said, if you just grab onto my back like a horse, then I can take you out. And so he did. And the king said, well, how can I repay you? You've saved my life. And the deer said, you just need to stop killing other animals, because they're innocent, they've done you no harm, so just promise me that you will no longer kill animals. He said, the poor animals that live in the forest deserve your pity, not your arrows. Though they may not have the same intelligence as men, they have the same feelings, and they too want happiness and fear suffering. Is it wrong to do to others what you do not wish them to do to you? We've held that golden rule. But this little comment about don't they also want to attain happiness and avoid suffering, that's also something we very commonly hear in Buddhism, that all beings are like us. They also want to attain happiness and avoid suffering. And kind of a little wisdom that we can remember as we go. But there's a couple of things that strike me a little bit about the story is not only that the king valued life after this, but that the way that the king was hypnotized by the deer, and he just couldn't take his eyes off it, and he was thinking, this is going to be my prize, this is going to be so valuable when I bring this deer, or whatever they did with the deer in those days, that he just wasn't paying attention to anything else. Not only did that land him in the ravine, but it made him oblivious to all the beauty and other life around him. And that just strikes me because we do that all the time. You know, we just get fixed on something and we just sort of ignore what else is happening. And that's also kind of a basic thing about Buddhism. It's like this thing about mindfulness, focusing, being more aware, and not being hypnotized by what we want or what we don't want. So, and that the other thing to me was that I kind of find applicable to life is that when the deer saw the king in the ravine, he said, oh, this poor king has been grown up in this wealthy, pampered life. He's not going to know how to get out. And it's like, that's so valuable if we can do that when we see another person, to really kind of see where they come from instead of just where we come from. It makes, our lives much easier. So those were just a couple of extra observations I had about the story. So in this story, it's valuing life and it's helping others, even though the king was going to kill him. He still cared. And so this is one of his kind of, maybe you'd say, lives where he purified something. Say that.
Does anyone have any questions or comments about anything we've gone over so far? Okay. All right, we'll move on then.
So it's just, these are just examples of the fact that this enlightenment happened as a result of a lot of work and a lot of time and intention.
So the next story we're going to talk about is called The Rabbit in the Moon. Is anyone familiar with this story? Well, you know how we talk about a man in the moon in the West. Well, in Asia, they talk about it being a rabbit in the moon. Mm-hmm. So this is kind of a story of how the rabbit ended up being in the moon. In the forest, there was a lot of excitement among the little animals because they were expecting a visitor, a very wise man, to come visit their little part of the forest. And so all the animals were scurrying around trying to find offerings for this wise man. And then they all kind of were very happy because they found something. The only one who didn't was the rabbit. He wasn't really a hunter. He wasn't he couldn't go grab a fish out of the river like the otter could. So he was kind of worried, like, what am I going to do? What am I going to give as an offering? So then when the wise man gathered with the animals and they all gave him their offerings, the rabbit said, well, why don't you just build a fire and I'll try to find something good for you to cook. So the wise man did that, And then the rabbit had this thought, oh, well, I could just jump into the flames and offer myself for him. And wouldn't that be a wonderful offering? So he was about to jump into the fire, and the wise man caught him and said, no, no, please don't do that. It's really not necessary. But, I really kind of appreciate how generous you are that you are willing to offer your life just to be of service to another being. And so, because of that, he lifted him up and placed him in the moon. And that's why we have the image of the rabbit in the moon. So, again, this was just an example of, great courage and bravery and generosity that the Buddha exhibited when he was in the form of a little rabbit.
A lot of the stories, besides the ones that we're looking at, he gave his arm to a tigress that was hungry and couldn't feed her cubs. And there are these really, really strong stories of generosity and giving, of this kind of selflessness. I did read one, a comment, I can't remember where it was, maybe you remember the reference, Rosalind, but it said, we're going to tell this story, but don't try it unless you're really a bodhisattva. Like, don't really go give your arm away. Okay, don't worry about that.
Don't go jumping in fires. Even though they tend to be around us, but
Yeah,
hopefully
but
all this rain that we've had is putting an end to that.
Is putting it into our fires, yeah. So the next one is about a woodpecker and a lion. And the woodpecker was this beautiful, beautiful bird who was known as, the most compassionate and helpful and kind bird in the forest. And it was so concerned about not hurting other beings that it just lived on flowers and berries and fruits. And one day he heard this lion that sounded like he was in pain. And so he flew to the lion and said, "Oh, king of the forest, what is wrong?" And he said, "I've got a bone stuck in my throat and I can't swallow." So the woodpecker, wanting to help, went and found a big stick to put in the lion's mouth so that the lion would keep his mouth open. And then he went in, and you can see him in this picture sort of pulling out this bone so that the lion could be relieved of this pain and, and the inability to swallow. So comes to pass that the woodpecker can't find that much food, and the lion has killed a prey, and the woodpecker is very hungry. But he's not going to ask the lion to share, but he goes and just sits near the lion. And the lion says, realizing he's there, says, "I'm the king of the forest. Why should I give you something? You're just a lowly bird. I could eat you in one bite." And so the woodpecker flies away. And there's a little fairy, in the sky when the woodpecker gets there and says, "Why didn't you, just poke his eyes out? Why didn't you take revenge? You could have done lots of things to take revenge." And the woodpecker says, "I didn't really take the bone out of his mouth to get a reward. I took the bone out of his mouth to help my friend because he was suffering." And the fairy says, "Well, how can that be your friend? I mean, he was going to, he just wouldn't even give you something to eat, not even a morsel." And the woodpecker said, "All beings are my friends, so that they don't need to give me something. I see all beings as my friends." And so I wanted to read a quote on the last page from this book. There's these beautiful illustrations that Rosalind actually did. But he says, "Kindness regards everyone as a friend, even those who do not understand kindness. I count as friends all those I care about. Every animal in the forest is my friend. Whether one animal is kind to me one day or unkind to me another matters not. With so many friends, there are always opportunities to bring joy to others." And, what I notice about it is he's at each time that he's helping another being, he's there with that being. He's not thinking about something else that happened or some reason that something should or shouldn't happen. He finds a moment of maybe communication, or a moment of, what am I trying to say, like camaraderie or empathy with each being that he's with, regardless of, you know, whether somebody's given him something or not, whether somebody's acknowledged him or not. And that brings him happiness. That's where maybe true happiness is found here. And this, of course, selfless action.
Does anyone have any comments or questions about anything we've gone over so far?
They're not deep stories, and yet at the same time, you know, they do give us little points that if we really took them seriously, if we really did these things, you know, our life would be a little bit different, I think, you know, and that's kind of part of the point. Besides the fact that, you know, we're showing that all the actions that in fact the Buddha took to become enlightened, it's just an illustration of this path.
So the next story we're going to be going over is called Heart of Gold, and it's about generosity.
This is a favorite. Dharma Publishing keeps selling out of this book.
Yeah. So this was a Heart of Gold. That was the name of this fellow. Was a very wealthy man, and he just provided everything that the villagers in his town needed. You know, if they needed clothes, he had clothes, beautiful clothes for them. If they were hungry, he had food, as you can see in the picture. And he really delighted in the ability to be able to give whatever he could. But one day, to be tested by the gods, all of his possessions disappeared. So he had this beautiful home with beautiful furnishings and everything. And he woke up, and all that was left was a sickle and a rope. And so he thought, well, what am I going to do? You know, all of these villagers rely on me for their livelihood, you know, for their food. They're going to all be hungry if I don't, if I'm not able to give them something. So he thought, well, I could take the sickle and go out into the fields and cut grass and sell it to the grass cutters who, you know, weave it into mats. And from that, you know, I could make a little money to buy some food to give away to the villagers. So that's what he did, you know, for several days. He was out in the fields under the hot sun, cutting the grass and then taking it to sell for whatever little change he could, and giving that away to the villagers. And so the gods were kind of really amazed that, you know, even this man who had nothing basically was still so generous in giving away everything that he had. That they did restore all his whole home and all of his wealth, and then he was able to give again. So I think this is, you know, just a good indication that sometimes we think, well, only the wealthy can afford to be generous. That's not really true. You know, even if all we have is some grass that we can, you know, cut and give the proceeds from selling to others, we can still practice generosity. And it's kind of a state of mind. It's not so much a state of your finances, whether you can be generous or not.
There's a story about a woman who had nothing except one coin or something like this for her livelihood. And when the Buddha came through, she was like, I have nothing to give. I'll just give this coin. And he exclaimed that was worth more than, you know, all what this king had given, because for her it was an extreme act of generosity. And so he's, you know, perfecting his heart as he goes through these lives. And, you know, generosity is one of the six perfections. One of the things that's really important to practice on the Buddhist path.
So these are just some examples of how the Buddha happened to come to the point where he was ready to, in his final life, to really reach enlightenment. It's because he'd, for many, many lifetimes, done these very, very generous acts, even when he was just a little animal, or when he was a very wealthy man. There's stories when he was, just a very simple person, but many, many different lives, many different walks of life, many different animal forms, but all of them were being very generous and giving and courageous, compassionate to their fellow man.
Or animal.
Or animal. Yeah. So it's just an inspiration for us to live our lives as much as we can with positive actions. And it also kind of illustrates the concept of karma. So like whatever positive actions we create are going to have positive results. And in Buddhism, they talk about if you plant an apple seed, you're going to get an apple tree. You're not going to get a lemon tree or or cactus or something else.
Yeah.
It's like whatever you cultivate through your actions are going to have good results. So if you can cultivate good actions, you will have good results.
And the extremity of some of these stories, especially when he jumps in the fire or gives off his arm, just show that we can, I don't know, I see it as kind of a challenge myself sometimes about, what am I really giving? What am I really, how much am I really giving up, or how much am I really giving? And just kind of challenge how that feels, when we do one thing versus another.
I'd just like to open it up for a little discussion. If anyone has any examples in their own life of how their actions had a result, if there's something you did that was generous, or it can be negative too, if you did a negative action and what kind of result that had. But I'd just like to hear if anyone has any thoughts about what kind of actions they've done and what kind of results that they've brought to your life. Maybe an act of generosity that you might have made, even something as simple as just a smile to someone who's like looking down. Sometimes that's the most generous thing we can do. Or helping somebody when they were down.
This is Carol. How about just the act of volunteerism in the community? I think is what I'm able to give, because I have time to give. So I like to use my time wisely with volunteering for charities and activities that are dear to my heart.
Great.
It's really, really.
Have you found any kind of results from that at all? Like, how it makes you feel, or how things when you've seen the results in the on the eyes or the face of the people you're helping?
Yes, and I mainly help animals. I do a lot of rescue work during the fires for large animals.
Oh my God.
So it's just, for me, that's what fills my spirit, is knowing that I'm helping these innocent animals who can't fend for themselves in the face of danger.
Yeah. We have a couple of horses on the property here, and when we were talking about, the possibility of having to evacuate and what to do with their little ones, but the other property has bigger ones. And fortunately, we didn't have to worry about it, but it was a concern.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing to help them out.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's wonderful. I'm a big animal fan.
So yeah, that's a great example, Carol. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? Alicia or Maria, do you have an example of actions you've done and what kind of results they've brought?
I actually have a kind of a quandary. I have in the past helped people to the point of exhaustion. And I finally just got to a place in my life where I had to start thinking about, well, wait a minute, I'm doing the giving a lot just naturally, reflexively, just automatically, to the point of even compromising my own health. And so it's funny that this topic is coming up, and it does come up a lot in these teachings and other paths that I've been studying. And the one of, self-giving and generosity and compassion. What compassion is, is always, but in terms of energy and giving to others, I'm almost at a point where I have to sort of renew my ability to do that, because I just got to the point where I'm like, I need to stop doing that because I'm getting depleted. So now I'm like, great. So now I'm at a point where I have to do, where I am feeling like I need to do it again, but in how, in what way, so that I don't, injure myself. Yeah. So I do remember in a past class that you did talk about that, but I can't remember which class that was. It was in the Eightfold Path. It was some nuance in one of those steps, but I can't remember which one it was.
Yeah.
What do you have to say? How?
Well,
Yeah.
It's important that we give to ourselves too. And, we need to care for ourselves. That's really important. Sometimes if also when we talk about developing wisdom, that helps us to be able to see more clearly what needs to be done. So, we talk about wisdom and compassion. These are like the two wings of enlightenment, right? So if we're just compassionate and giving all the time without the wisdom, the grounding in our heart, and that grounding which helps us see clearly what needs to be done, then sometimes we can get exhausted like that. They call it like compassion fatigue, or, we can get burnt out, So it's important that we, when we're generous, that we also do it wisely, taking into consideration our own limitations, our own strengths, and what our own needs are, because otherwise, you're right, you can just like overdo it, and that's not helpful either. So yeah, there's that balance that you have to keep. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, good example. Thank you, Maria.
Yeah.
Alicia, do you have anything you want to share?
Well, I was thinking about that just now when she was speaking about that, and I know about when you're giving almost unconditionally, when you have to take care of someone. And one of the things that I have realized, what I had developed, was this reciprocity, where as I was giving, I was receiving, and that in its just this that really helped, where it gave me strength as in seeing what my giving, what that person gave to me. So it was almost nourishing.
Wow.
So that was one, that was one thing that I experienced with giving like that. And the other thing that that has been interesting to me about giving and helping others is developing a habit of doing that. It's like developing a habit by just by almost imagining giving. And just by imagining giving, it seems like it makes a habit happen in you where automatically you're giving. It's like before you even know it, you're giving. And it's a really interesting development that I have seen. That's all I have to say.
Okay, well, thank you, Alicia. That's really great insight. Alicia's a good friend of ours and works here at Radnor too, and so we know she took care of her partner for many years after he had had a stroke, and so I'm sure that there was many times when you were very tired and wanting to give up, but the fact that you were able to gain something of benefit for yourself through the action is such a nice thing to hear about, and often I think it is something that we can experience again if our hearts are open to receiving that, and I think that helps with that compassion fatigue. It's what keeps us going. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you.
So now we're going to do a little practice.
Let's see if I can.
No, you can
Go
go
ahead.
ahead with it. We're going to do a Kumne exercise that has to do with kind of opening the heart chakra, which is a really good one when we're working with our generosity. And this one's called flying. And I like it because, we're talking about wisdom and compassion being the two wings of enlightenment, right?
Right.
So when we have both of those working together, then we can really kind of soar. We're going to be doing this to each of the four directions, east, west, north, and south, and then the fifth time in the center. But first, I just want to show you the motion, and you can do it along with me if you'd like. So you want to have your feet at least hip distance apart. Give yourself a nice strong base for your movement. Hands are by your sides, and we're going to just slowly lift our arms up. You can almost think of them as just floating up, like you're not really making an effort to let them rise. You're just letting them float up from your sides. And palms are facing out as your hands come together above your head. And then you want to give a nice stretch up towards the sky. Feet really planted on the earth so you feel a nice stretch through the whole spine. Then take a nice deep breath into the belly and expanding the chest. And slowly let it out as the arms slowly come back down to your sides. This is a Kumne exercise. It's kind of Tibetan style yoga. And I think Maria's probably done this a few times with me in some of my other classes. This is my favorite because it really opens the heart center and also relaxes the neck and shoulders if you've been at a computer all day or other things that get your shoulders tense. And that helps to let the flow of energy move between the body and the breath and the mind. So nice flow of energy that can happen. So now we're going to do this to each of the four directions, and then the fifth is the center. And as we do it, I'm going to talk a little about the qualities in each of these directions according to the Tibetan system. So we'll start with facing the east. So if you can remember where the sun rises at your home, you want to face that way. I'm just going to face forward so you can still continue to hear me well, but Linda's going to be facing the different directions. So as your arms come up, you can think about the sun rising in the morning, a nice, bright, sharp, clear energy, and that's the quality in this direction. And the color is white, and the element's water. And there's a negative emotion associated with each direction, and in the east, that's anger, hatred. And when it becomes transformed, it becomes mirror-like wisdom. So very clear and reflective. So nice stretch up to the sky. Deep breath into the belly, expanding the chest. And slowly let it out as the arms slowly come back down to your sides. And in the same way that a body of water, once it's agitated, doesn't reflect very clearly what's around it, once the water becomes calm and settled, it can reflect very clearly. So when our minds are calm and settled, we can see very clearly what's going on around us. And it helps us be able to see what someone needs very clearly, what we can do to help, and where we, to understand ourselves clearly as well. So let's take a quarter turn to our right, and that means you'll be facing the south. So as the arms come up, you can think of the sun moving through the sky. Once it's overhead is a nice bright yellow. That's the color in this direction. The element is earth. So nice, solid, earthy quality. A nice stretch up towards the sky. Feet really planted on the earth. Deep breath into the chest and the belly. And slowly let it out as the arms slowly come down. And the emotion in this direction is pride, and transformed it becomes equanimity. So instead of seeing ourselves as above others, as we do when we're being prideful, we see that all beings are equal in that they all deserve our love and compassion, ourselves especially too. So we deserve that caring and compassion and evenness as well. And let's take another quarter turn to our right, and we'll be facing the west. So as your arms come up, you can think of the sun having moved through the sky. Once it's about to set, we've got these beautiful reds of the sunset. It's this color in this direction, and the element's fire. So nice stretch up towards the sky. Deep breath into the chest and the belly. And slowly let it out as the arms slowly come down. And the emotion in this direction is passion or greed, all the grasping qualities, and transformed it becomes compassion. So very deep caring for the suffering of others and doing what we can to solve it, to alleviate it. And then one more quarter turn to your right, and you're facing the north. So as the arms come up, you can think of the beautiful greens in the forests in the north, and the air is the element, the oxygen they create. Nice stretch up towards the sky, feet really planted on the earth. So we're one of these great old redwood trees. Deep breath into the belly and the chest, and slowly let it out as our branches slowly come down to our sides. And the emotion in this direction is envy or jealousy, and transformed it becomes something called all-accomplishing wisdom. So a very dynamic, active quality of helping beings wherever they're in need. And let's take one more quarter turn to our right, and we'll be facing the east once again. But we're going to be focusing on all the space above us and below us, and also our deep inner space as well. So as your arms come up, you can think of the beautiful deep royal blue, which is the color in this direction, and the element is ether, or the atmospheric quality. So nice stretch up to the outer reaches of the solar system. Feet really planted on the earth. Almost you can feel them going through the earth and out the other side. You're so grounded. Deep breath into the chest and the belly. And then slowly let it out as the arms slowly come back down to your sides. And the emotion in this direction is ignorance, and transformed becomes our deep inner wisdom. So if you want, you can just take a few moments to kind of shake things out a little bit. Just let go of any tension you have in the body, in your shoulders and neck. Sitting at a computer, you probably have some tension there. Maybe at your back, just shake out your upper back, your middle back, your lower back. Shake out your hips, shake out your legs, shake out your feet, shake out your hands. Just shake, 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 shake. Letting go of all the problems of the day, all the worries. And just take a nice big sigh of relief. The day is almost over. Get to relax. Nice quiet evening ahead, I hope, for most of you. And then when you're ready, let's go ahead and sit down.
Oh, you're sleepy.
And yeah, you can get a little
Relaxed.
sleepy, get a little too relaxed. So we're going to be sitting in what's called the 7 gestures posture. So that means that the legs form a nice solid base for the body. If you want to sit on a cushion on the floor, you can, or you can be sitting on your chair. If you're sitting in a chair, it's nice to let your feet be a little bit widely apart, so that it forms a nice solid base for your body. And your hands can be on your knees, or if you prefer, they can be in your lap, left under the right usually. And those are both meditation gestures. Your shoulders should be relaxed. If you'd like, you can bring them up and then back and then down so that they're in the most low, relaxed position that they can get in. Your arms you want to have relaxed and just resting by your sides. Your chest, you want to have that up and out a little bit, and that helps to straighten the back of your spine, kind of in the waist area. And if you tuck your chin in slightly, that helps to straighten the upper part of the spine, in your neck area. So when we're meditating, we want to, as much as we can, have the spine as straight as possible, because that helps the energy to flow more smoothly. If we're kind of hunched over or sideways, the energy just doesn't flow as well. And the eyes can be either closed or gazing on the ground in front of us, about 3 feet in front. And when we're not chanting, you can curl your tongue so that the tip touches the upper palate, the back of the upper front teeth. And that little curl helps us to breathe evenly through both nose and mouth at the same time. And that's a really nice, relaxed way to breathe. So now that we're all in a nice, comfortable position, we've shaken out the day and stretched it out, all the tension, we're ready to do some chanting. So we're going to be chanting the mantra for a female deity named Prajna Paramita. And that means, her name means perfection of wisdom. Prajna means wisdom, Paramita is perfection. And she's really kind of embodies the idea of the deep inner wisdom that we're trying to touch through our meditation. And we'll chant her mantra, which is Gate, Gate, Parasamgate, Bodhi Svaha. And this means kind of gone beyond, so gone beyond the idea of ego and the duality that represents, and gone far beyond that to a state of enlightened awareness. And Svaha is just like, kind of, so be it, may it be so. So we'll chant this 10 times, and then we'll sit in meditation for about 10 minutes after that. Gate, Gate, Parasamgate, Bodhi Svaha. 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 So just sit silently in our meditation now. If you'd like, you can visualize white light coming in through the crown chakra at the top of the head, filling the senses with this beautiful white light that's like nectar. And you can experience it's flowing into the throat, opening the throat chakra so you can breathe nice and easily. And then flowing into the chest and the torso, filling all of our internal organs with this lovely white light. And flowing down from the shoulders into the arms and the hands, relaxing the hands and the fingers. And finally flowing down into the legs, the hips and the thighs and the knees, the calves and the ankles, finally into the feet. And as our hands and feet relax, it helps to relax the whole body, because we have acupressure points in our extremities that relate to the whole systems of the body. So it's very important when we can relax our hands and feet. It really helps the energy flow through the body. And if you do have thoughts come, just let them kind of come and go, almost like bubbles in a glass of water. You don't have to chase after them one after another. You can just watch them bubble up and then disappear. And if you'd like, you can focus on your breathing, breathing in nice, fresh, clean, alive energy, and breathing out any tension, worries, fears, anxieties. Just sit in this nice, relaxed, open state of mind and enjoy the touching our inner wisdom, letting it inform our body, our breath, and our mind, letting it expand. If you want, you can even imagine the light expanding out from your body into all the directions. Excuse me. Touching all beings with this beautiful healing light. So to conclude our practice, we're going to chant Om Ahum 3 times, and that's a way of dedicating any benefit we might have created through our practice to all sentient beings.
So to take what we've done tonight, reviewed tonight into the week, we have a practice to write or reflect on setting an intention to act with greater kindness, generosity, and courage being important as well, helping to develop greater wisdom and compassion in your life. You can chant this mantra 10 times and meditate for 10 minutes like we just did, sending wishes for wisdom to be a guide to all beings. Sometimes you can just try to envision all beings, just however that works. It's kind of an interesting thing to do as well. To envision the wisdom or the light, just literally touching whatever you can envision as beings, people, animals.
And it would also be a nice practice to think of at least one time when you've done something generous or kind or courageous for another being. And really think deeply about how that affected your life, how it affected the life of the beings you were helping, and really think about what that was like. What was the karmic result of your action? What was your intention? What led you to act in this kind way? What was the result of the action? So even just, one simple action might have been something very simple like giving a piece of apple to a horse or, giving a little treat to a kitten or dog that you have, or being kind to one of your friends when they were had a need. So just really focusing um, on the acts of compassion that you've actually done in this life, and how that made you feel, how it kind of changed the trajectory of a situation or of your life, and how what you saw in the other person as a result of the action. So this is just a way for us to really, isn't it? Begin to kind of having some appreciation for the positive things we've done in our life, and that gives us encouragement to continue on that path as well. So, anybody has any questions or comments about any of these thoughts or ideas or practices we've done tonight? In a few extra minutes, anyone would like to share anything?
Can I ask a question? Um, it's kind of, uh, I guess maybe a personal thing that I think I noticed that I struggle with is after doing an act of generosity or something kind, um, I'll often find myself afterwards, uh, like patting myself on the back for doing that and becoming proud of the action. And I don't think there's, necessarily anything wrong with feeling good about doing something nice, but I'm curious what Buddhism says about that, and if there are any ways for me to practice on just letting these things happen without me feeling like I want to take credit for it.
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, Usually they talk about trying to give in a way that there's no giver, there's no gift, and there's no one receiving the gift. So, like, just kind of being aware of the kind of open dimension of reality. So instead of, thinking, oh, I did such a great job, patting yourself on the back. Um, that's okay, to start with, that you're um, acknowledging you did something positive and that uh, you deserve some appreciation for yourself. But you just don't want to take it too much further than that. Like, okay, that was really great. Oh, wow, I'm just become such a generous being now. And isn't that great? What a wonderful, generous being I am. You know what I mean? It's just like taking it a little bit too far. So you want
Sure.
to just kind
Yeah.
of, and it just helps to be aware of it, And so,
And don't beat yourself up. Oh my God, I was proud again. It's just like let it go. Yeah.
yeah, just kind of be aware, like, okay, I think I'm going a little too far here.
Yeah. Just let
Yeah.
it go.
I think what you said at the beginning might be the most helpful to me, just trying to understand it as sort of like there is no giver, there's no giving, and there's no receiver. It's just like that's just the way things are. So yeah, I'll work on.
Yeah, it's just kind of the natural expression of your humanity that you're going to be generous. Um, Sometimes in the text they talk about how a fruit tree, it doesn't think, oh, isn't that great? I'm, bearing fruit for the world.
Everybody
In your
owes me
case,
something.
grapes.
Yeah.
The vines, they don't think, oh, I'm so great. I'm giving grapes. They just do it. It's just part of their nature, right? To grow leaves and then grow fruit and
Yeah.
give. So as much as we can, just you know cultivate that kind of attitude. It's
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. Thank you.
yeah. Anybody else have any comments, questions?
I wanted to say something also about appreciation,
Mhm.
about the fact that you could even give something to appreciate that you had that capacity. And in a sense, that also isn't from an ego-centered intention. It's from a deep caring for yourself that you actually can do something and appreciating that.
Yeah, that's really a nice point, Alicia. That um, when we acknowledge that we've done something positive, that that we can just appreciate and value that that's happened, rather than letting it kind of go into, oh well, I must be such a wonderful person now. That just kind of let it go. If we're going to keep going with it, just let it go into more and more deeper appreciation, for the fact that we have this ability. We have uh, our both hands and both feet and legs and arms work. And aren't we lucky that that happens so that we could help somebody else, and that we have sight and hearing, and our senses are intact so that we're able to help. So just more like go towards that, like really appreciating what we have, and that we're able to do something of helpful to others. That's great. That's really a nice antidote to kind of feeling proud or
Also, it's not very often we have those opportunities. I think more opportunities are not to give. So I think it's really, it's rare to be able to do that. So it's the other thing.
and appreciate the instances when we do have the opportunity to give, and just really enjoy and appreciate the fact that we're able to do that. So yeah, great. Anybody else have anything they want to add? Michelle, did you want to say something?
Well, there was something I wanted to mention earlier when an experience that I had giving and it didn't turn out so well. I was a big sister to a little girl, and so I started seeing her like once a week. And then when the holidays rolled around, she was 9 years old. And the holidays rolled around, I started seeing her like 2 to 3 times a week just because of all the activities that were available to take her to. And then there were several times where I would show up and the parents wouldn't even be there, or, and then I had gotten her all these Christmas presents, and I don't know, it just turned out where they weren't always following through. And so when I spoke to the big sister, big brother program, they said, "Oh, you're being too nice. You need to cut back. You need to see her like once every other week." And I just thought, whoa, I would never think that being nice would be, taken wrongly. So I don't know. And then ultimately they moved and stopped the program, but it just was like, it kind of put me off guard because I just didn't think of it ever being something negative to be too nice.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so either.
Yeah, so maybe the parents might have felt that you were doing more than they could do, so it kind of sort of outshining them a little bit, perhaps. But yeah, but that it's true that sometimes happens. When we're giving, that it's not always accepted graciously, and sometimes we even maybe give in the wrong way too. We think that what we're doing is going to be helpful for somebody, but maybe it's not. That maybe they feel bad about us giving to them because, for whatever reason, they think we're putting them down or something like that.
When I was in San Francisco working, and I had a consultant coming in from the peninsula, and she would always bring these lunch bags with food for homeless people. And she'd prepare them and bring them in the city. But she said, I found that, her words speaking, I found that I really had to ask people if I could give it to them. I couldn't just say, here, have some food, because there was like a dignity aspect. So when you said how we give, kind of made me reminded me of that.
But I think it's important that even when we have experiences like that we don't let it discourage us,
Right.
from being generous, and also like to not so much be attached to the outcome. It's sort of like Jason was talking about. You don't necessarily need to go beyond just the fact that we're giving and that we're happy to be giving. You maybe don't need to worry too much about the result or how it's received. It's like, okay, you did your best. You were just generous as you can be, and whether it was like received in the same spirit? Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, and sometimes that happens, when we give. It's maybe not received as graciously as we would wish. That's okay, that's
Right.
okay too. We still, the fact that we're making an effort and being generous, that's still very positive.
Goes back
Right.
to intention, where we started with intention.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I hope that helps, and hope it didn't discourage you too much.
I mean, of course, initially I was very discouraged, but ultimately I look back and think, I grew as a person and it was a good experience for me, so.
I bet you it was a good experience in that child's life too, to see that somebody does care and somebody does give. So if they never see that, that's not good either.
Right. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. Hope you have a very positive and generous week, and that your gifts are appreciated, and that you don't get overly prideful about them, but just have a nice, balanced, positive experience this week. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, Jonathan. Are you there, Jonathan? Oops. I'm glad he made it. I was nervous.
In meeting for